we were talking before the program about what we should discuss today, and two names came up: Elon Musk and Jesus Christ. Both, it seems to be the season for both of them right now. So we thought, since so many people in this largely Christianist nation also submit to the secular Church of Elon, that we might compare and contrast, that classic academic exercise of compare and contrast these two iconic figures for the incoming Republican administration and the next presidency of Donald Trump. So with that, Richard Wolff, welcome to the program.
Very much happy to be here, Richard, and I think it's a great idea to try to put these two, can I call them opposites, together. Very Hegelian.
Well, you're tipping our hand a little bit by calling them opposites, but I don't think it'll be any surprise to anyone that we see them that way. So let's get the stipulations out of the way. We're not talking theologically. We're certainly not espousing our personal beliefs. We're talking about Jesus Christ as a cultural figure, as a historical figure, as the way Christ and Christianity are interpreted by society, and then what we know of the historical record. The only thing I'll stipulate is, I know some people say they don't believe Christ ever existed. My sense from reading the literature is that there was a person with that name. I know some people disagree with that, but I think that's fairly well established by now. And what the scholarship seems to say about Jesus Christ, or whatever his original name was, again, leaving the theology aside, that this was a Jew of obviously the first century of the Christian era, who was a preacher of some kind, an itinerant preacher, as there were a number of in that era in Jewish lands, that he preached. There are all sorts of scholars who go through the Bible and print in red the words that they think can have the oldest provenance versus the words that are newer and clearly added later on for political reasons. And the picture that emerges from that is a Jesus that rejected familial authority. Some translations say kill your parents, but certainly psychologically, kill your parents and follow me. A rich man is no more likely to get into heaven than a camel is to get through the eye of a needle. The scholarship of the historian Elaine Pagel and others basically paints a picture of Jesus as a communist and his followers living collectively, communally, repudiating the worldly empire of money and power and so on. And if the historical record is to be believed, these preachings were considered a threat to the social order. And yet all of this, although it's readily apparent in the theological literature, including the Bible, the New Testament, seems to fall by the wayside in place of, for many people in this country, as many self-identified Christians, in the place of a kind of libertarian, right-wing fanatic. The guy who said, beat your swords into plowshares, would now be investing, buying stock shares in Raytheon. And so starting with Jesus, I think if we look at the historical picture, guy was a refugee, right? He was born to a refugee family, running from the authorities. He was a convicted criminal. He was imprisoned. He was executed. He's at the. I don't want to offend anybody, but he was more like Leonard Peltier than he was like Donald Trump, or somebody else, a famous political prisoner. So we have this historical figure of Jesus, and I'll close with this. Stan Freberg. You remember Stan Freberg? This was a
Sure.
guy who made comedy records and did comedy things, extremely funny. Turns out he was a very observant Christian, a very believing Christian. And he did a whole thing back in 1960 or so of green Christmas, the commercialization of Christmas. Nobody even talks about that anymore because it's assumed, it's a given. People get stuff for free. And so I turn it over to you with this question. Getting stuff for free is what conservatives supposedly hate. So what are they celebrating exactly?
Well, I am very far from a historian of Christianity or indeed of any religion, but a few bits of the history do occur to me listening to you. If I have the history right, in Jesus's time, people like him, itinerant ministers, messiahs, if you like, were fairly often deeply hated by powerful men of that time, and therefore were hounded out and forced to flee, forced to shut up, or were imprisoned or were killed, as Jesus himself is said to have happened to him. But the fact that Christianity grew, even though Christ himself died, led, if I'm not mistaken, the Emperor Constantine 2 or 3 centuries after Jesus to realize that he could be a more powerful emperor using Christianity than persecuting Christianity. And so he made a deal with the church at that time. And the deal was, I will stop persecuting you if you recognize me as your leader, as your emperor. And the church made that deal and went from being the belief of the oppressed and rebellious masses to the official religion endorsing and sanctifying the secular power. And it seems to me that this deal made in the third, if I'm remembering, third or fourth century after Jesus' death has been the dominant story ever since. That under slavery, which is how Rome developed, and then under feudalism, which replaced slavery, and now under capitalism that replaced feudalism with the French and American revolutions, the Christian churches have by far mostly functioned as adjuncts supportive of secular power than they have been in the opposition. And when they have been in the opposition, they've had to pay dearly, dearly for it. And so I'm not all that surprised that the Christianity of today is mostly in the service of political power, not in the opposition to it. And even in the few places in the world where you get a little of that opposition, it's often heavily financed by the West, which is using the religious views over there in its own machinations. The United States is, for example, supporting the jihadi Muslim group in Syria right now in order to control that history. We supported the Taliban in order to undo the Soviets when they were in Afghanistan. But other than that, modern religion has been subordinated either to political power or to the capitalist economic system, and more likely to both of them.
And if we accept the historical record again about Jesus and his life, one of the dominant themes is rejection of the marriage of political authority and religious authority, that he stood in opposition this has been sometimes interpreted in an anti-Semitic way, but I don't. That doesn't seem to be the message, really. That he stood in opposition to the religious establishment of his time, the Sanhedrin, the senior rabbinical judges of the time. By the way, one of my great grandfather had a similar role in what is now Ukraine. So he stood in opposition to their authority and their willingness to act on behalf of the colonial occupier, which was, of course, Rome. So, yes, this marriage of religious and political power has been a great, and by great I mean large, not good, a great instrument of manipulation by the U.S. empire. And so has the secular religion of the West, which is the concept of so-called liberal democracy. One could argue it's neither, but the idea that we can export our version of democracy, which is already absurd because it's oligarchy, it's not democracy, and that free market capitalism plus American style democracy, to me, is every bit a religion as Christianity or any other faith, because it is based on articles of faith that are seemingly immune to evidence or to contrary results. The free market God, the worship of the free market God persists even as he abuses his followers. So, and it seems to me that much of our apparatus now is designed to export the secular religion, since exporting the traditional religion is probably played out. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, again, let me do a little bit of the history with you because I think it's illuminating here. I think the church has been a place, even to this day, where those who think of themselves strictly as Christians, followers of Christ, do try to hold on to the image and the notion and the conception of Jesus as a communist with a small c, a person with beliefs in sharing, in turning the other cheek, and all the rest of it. And I think you see periodically the flaring up of Christians who are opposed to what has happened to the mainstream of the church and try, whether they call it liberation theology or a whole host of other ideas, in various ways to go back to what they feel has been lost in and by the Christian church. Nothing is so common as to hear either a Protestant or a Catholic minister rail in church on Sunday against those who are Christian in name only, or Christian very superficially without a commitment, even though they don't agree on what exactly the commitment is. But I'm struck in particular as an economist by a famous struggle in the Middle Ages, in medieval times in Europe, when capitalism was first emerging, when the idea of the capitalist is that what I'm about and what I am to do is to make a profit, and that whatever I do that enhances my profit is thereby justified, and whatever I need to do that might be opposed is thereby ruled out, not necessary to believe in that anymore. And there were flashpoints for this, and two of them, one of them was charging interest, and the other one was charging as much on the price for whatever you have to sell as, quote unquote, the market will bear. And I think it might be instructive for people to go through very briefly what that was. So here we go. In the nature of lending money, the capitalist says, I'm willing to part with my money, let's say for a year, but you have to pay me for that. You have to give me something so that I let you use my money for this year. And we now know that thing as an interest rate. You have to, if I lend you $100, I'm going to demand you give me back at the end of the year my principal, the $100, plus an interest of say $5 or $10 on top of it, so that I make money by lending out. At that point, in the Middle Ages, when the capitalists wanted that, the church came down against them and said, no, the teaching of Jesus Christ is that if there's a person who approaches you with a request to borrow money, it's because that person doesn't have the money they need and therefore has to come to you. And you, as a good Christian, should help your fellow citizen. If you have money you're not using and he needs money, you should give him that money. You can ask for it back when the need has passed, but you can't take advantage of the neediness of your fellow human being by ripping an interest payment out of him. So he ends up worse off next year than he did this year, because then he'll be out the extra $5 or $10. So that the idea was Christianity was a system of values that clashed with capitalism.
Right.
That put them against each other, and it's really clear, in case you're wondering, who won and who lost. Because interest is charged everywhere by capitalists, by Christians, by everybody else. And the opposition to it, known in the church as the opposition to usury, their word for it, is a dead idea. It's barely around. And the same thing with prices. And by the way, that showed up in the presidential election. Kamala Harris says, I'm going to do something about prices. In the Middle Ages, the price was considered to be an object of Catholic, Roman Catholic teaching. And the church taught that there is a just price. That was their idea, a price that conformed to what is just. And by that, they variously meant what it really cost whoever produced it to produce it is what they could justly charge for it. But it would be, here we go, illegal, immoral, and fattening to put a profit on top of the object, so that not only are you charging what it cost to produce it, but you're exploiting the situation to grab for yourself. And so profit was declared an abomination. Well, again, I can point out the Christians lost that one. Profit is now everywhere. And if there is a religion in the United States, well, the closest thing we come is the religion that declares profit is the bottom line. And I can make the same joke Marx made in the first volume of Capital, that capitalists are forever looking for profits, by which he meant both the one spelled with an F and the one spelled with a PH.
Right. And by the way, Islam also has the same prohibition. The charging of interest in any form, or the paying of interest, it's called riba, I believe, and it is strictly forbidden, which is why there's now a whole field of Islamic banking that may at times, fudge the rules a little bit, but one interesting thing I found, I haven't looked at it in 10 years, but after the financial crisis of 2008, Islamic banking institutions were not nearly as harmed as regular over-leveraged banks. They came through much better, but in the years since then, as we re-leveraged ourselves, they're falling behind in terms of their returns. So, which, if there's a moral there, to use a pun, it's that under the current system, at the current moment, exploitation pays, right? And so I guess I would say, we have these religious teachings, we have this historical figure who's really not being largely heeded at all, except for the kinds of people you mentioned, liberationist theology in Latin America and elsewhere. When I worked for Bernie Sanders, he was especially fond of Pope Francis for some of his teachings on ecology and poverty and so on. But I don't see the Catholic Church mobilizing on that. And you also have the occasional Christian Marxist like Terry Eagleton in Britain and so on. But Dorothy Day here in the United States, but so at the same, there are a large group of people. If we had a Venn diagram of people who profess to follow Jesus Christ and people who also think extremely highly of Elon Musk, the other patron saint of the Trump administration, then, or self-professed patron saint, I'm not going to allow them to take Jesus, but I think there'd be a strong overlap between the two, which is interesting because to me, Elon Musk is kind of the personification. Obviously, he's an individual, but I mean, as a public figure, he's the personification of the greed and excess and exploitation of this age. I mean, from the fact that he started out with his father's apartheid nest egg from South Africa, and he is, to me, the archetypal billionaire because while a lot of people still revere billionaires as being smarter, I think they just have a pathology that's well suited to making money. And now we're dealing with a situation where that pathology is getting an influence over how our social contract is being managed through their plans to cut Social Security and so on. And I wonder, maybe the juxtaposition of Elon and Jesus seems bizarre, but it seems to me those are the two faces I would expect to see in a curio from, someone who's wearing around their neck the symbolism of the Trump administration.
Well, as a final thought offer, let me put it this way. I hold the capitalist system responsible for having produced the difficulties for the Christians that it always has from its inception to this current point in time epitomized by Mr. Musk. It has produced incredible wealth. That's kind of the good news. The bad news is it's concentrated that wealth in the hands of a tiny group of people. And that tiny group of people is distinguished by nothing so much as its wealth. I mean, really, is there much else to congratulate Mr. Musk for? Has he done wonderful things for people suffering? He could. He has the money, more than enough to wipe out poverty and wipe out homelessness, for example, in the United States by writing a check, which would not diminish his status as one of the richest people. He could give away half of what he has. He'd still be among the richest 10 people on the planet. And so without cost to him, he could transform the lives of millions. He chooses not to do that. And by my understanding of Christian morality, that leaves him very far from being a morally Christian person, whatever he declares in the convenience of the moment. He is a standing contradiction. When you distribute wealth in that unequal way, you make the people who have it rightly fear the mass of people who are denied it and who suffer correspondingly. And therefore you have to protect yourself. And therefore you buy the political system, which might otherwise reflect what the mass of people need and want. You can't allow that to happen. And Mr. Musk has bought the US government. He's in the process of buying the British government. He seems to have a halfway there with the Argentinian government. There is no reason for him ever to stop. As the wealth accumulates, so can and we'll get the ultimate irony, which is that capitalism has allowed for the church to be utterly subordinated to its own mechanisms. And when those clash with its morality, it's the morality that goes. And suddenly the market is an anthropomorphized thing that we allow to arrange the affairs amongst us, not notions of justice, not even the Catholic or Christian notions of justice. No justice at all. Justice is the result. If some are super rich, that's the just result. And that's what Americans mean when they talk about gospel Christianity or the gospel of money in Christianity, the mega churches that literally preach that your success in making money reflects your standing in the eyes of the church. Wow. That's a complete capitulation. Even the Middle Ages had some struggle. Even liberation theology represented some desire to hold on to something in early Christianity. But the dominant position today has been what Constantine could only have hoped for in the 3rd century after Jesus. And that is the complete using of Christianity. And by the way, this applies to most other religions. What in the world do you make of a Netanyahu in Gaza invoking the Bible for what he does? It is extraordinary.
And we have a situation where one of my beefs that I've had for many years, with going back probably 20 years now in print, with Sam Harris and other new atheist writers, is I think sometimes, and I'm not going to get into atheism versus belief or any of those things, is that sometimes I think that specific group of quote unquote new atheists, Richard Dawkins, Sam Harris, Christopher Hitchens, confused cause and effect. They strayed from my understanding of history as a series of broad economic, social, and historical forces where one class tries to dominate and control another and amass resources for itself. They have tended to believe that, quote unquote, religion is the problem. I tend to believe that capitalism is the problem, just to show all my cards, and that religion is a great tool for the capitalists. I mean, if you go back to 12th, 13th, 14th century England, they gave the monasteries all the land, but they had their own ways of controlling it. And when that system collapsed, that land didn't go to the people; it went to the lords and dukes and earls. To me, that's where the causality lies, and I think that's why I made this sort of intuitive connection between Jesus and Elon, because I think for people who admire Elon or consider him worthy of anything except clinical treatment, I think they are worshiping the other side of the same coin that institutionalized religion represents, which is this long historical power dynamic, hundreds of years old by now, where the few are trying to control the many and will use anything at hand to do it.
Yeah, and I think we're at a key moment in that process. As you and I have discussed, it is my sense that the American empire is now in decline, that the system that depends on it is also in trouble. And so they are reaching out, as we can see, to the religious folks in the hopes of using an alliance there to shore up a declining empire by enlisting the church as a supportive institution. And, and I'm sure many Americans noticed the people wearing the T-shirts in the American South saying that Jesus is their Lord and Trump is their president. Okay, this is the identification that all secular leaders have wanted there to be. And that's what they push for. And then they destroy those movements, even inside the church, that don't want to go in that direction. And those movements are always there, and they're there now too. And I think that part of the decline of the empire is going to intensify and aggravate those struggles inside the church. That for people for whom the church's ancient morality still has a hold are going to have more and more troubles going along with putting the children of immigrants into cages. That these things may take a while, but they sit there and they fester and they will emerge, especially as these kinds of acts are intensified, which is the plan of the Trump administration.
And, I don't blame, I've had this conversation with so many people. I don't blame the people wearing those T-shirts. Jesus is my Lord and Trump is my president, because I don't think we have a real left in this country that has offered another analysis, one that people can grasp onto. I mean, I know some of these people, they're nice people, they're good people, they're good-hearted. They might be the first person I call if I'm in a car accident in the middle of a rainy night somewhere, I mean, trustworthy, loyal. So to me, the idea is not to condemn the individuals, but to call out, as we are doing, you and I right now, the forces in play here, and to summon these ancient, if you want to call them spirits or tropes, or if you're so inclined, mythologies, whatever. There appears to be an innate human need for communion, for ritual, for belief. If that is, I'd rather have Terry Eagleton as the Pope, to mention the British Marxist Catholic again, rather have him as Pope than have no church at all and have a secular theology led by Elon Musk. So that's people are going to get mad at me, but that's my conclusion out of all of this. What's yours?
Yeah, my conclusion is that for me, Elon Musk stands as a horror, that we should not have an economic system that deprives millions of people of a reasonable chance to educate their children in a college, even though the children have the ability, the desire, the motivation. What are we doing? Even comparing our society to European, the French, the Germans, their colleges and universities are free to their people. What is going on here? We have technological advance, but we concentrate the benefits of it in the hands of a tiny number of people. That's shameful. That's denying opportunity to the many in order to allow the few. Mr. Elon Musk plays with going to the moon. He can't figure out what to do with his billions, so he plays with them. Yeah, but there are children at the other end of the table where he sits who are crying because they don't have enough to eat. And he doesn't hear them, and he doesn't see them, and he doesn't care. He's living the life that contradicts what Jesus was preaching. And I know it's not fashionable to point it out, but it ought to be. And history, I suspect, will eventually render that judgment. They will not find him delightful because of the outfit he wears. They will not say he was a great inventor because instead of solving the problem of the individual automobile, which is an ecological and humane disaster, he didn't come up with what we know the solution is: good, safe, public transportation. No. He came up with the profitable alternative. What would allow individual autos to continue to be made with all their horrible consequences. All you've done is gone from fossil fuel to electricity. That's not a great breakthrough. That's a profitably great breakthrough. And that distinction, that's at the root of what it might mean to be a great man and a serious, moral, ethical human being.
And by the way, his cars are shit. They were showing one of the Cybertrucks in, God help you if you need a repair on a Tesla. And they were showing one of the Cybertrucks in the mall the other day. Tesla's put in a little showroom. I just have to get this out. And I went and looked at it. I took pictures of it. I'd heard that the shiny metallic finish on them goes spotty and dark. It was already going spotty and dark. It already looked like crap, and they hadn't even sold it yet. And I've seen them on the road. They're hideous. Anyone who drives one looks like a jackass. But they were designed by a jackass for jackasses, and the rest of us are paying the price. So I had to get that out. Excuse me.
No, it gives a good touch of concreteness to it all.
And with that, and future generations, if we return to sanity, will just gaze and wonder at.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, as always, Richard Wolff, thanks for coming on the program. It's always great to talk to you, and thanks.
Thank you as well, RJ, and my best wishes for the holidays.
And to you. And we'll be right back after this. I'm Richard RJ Eskow, and this is The Zero Hour.